We need your scariest work stories. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer submission podcast, so if you've experienced something terrifying while at your job, send it to us at darkstories.org. And be sure to support the show by leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. By the way, you can find us on YouTube too, under my host name, Darkness Prevails. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I don't trust people wearing coats anymore. What are they hiding in there, huh? Oh, you're just trying to stay warm, huh? Sure, buddy, but I know you're hiding something. A weapon, outside food or drink, an outie belly button? My apologies. You see, I heard a disturbing story recently that has me second-guessing everyone who wears coats. I have several new true scary work stories too to share with you today. Stories that have me paranoid of farms and people with road rage as well. You'll see why. Come on, grab a coffee on the house. I'm gonna tell you some tales from the break room. Lunch break road rage from Michigan Maniac. I'm a 25-year-old guy living in southern Michigan. I'm only about a 20-minute drive from the Indiana border to give you some idea of my location. This happened 2 years ago, in the summer of 2021, while I was working at a Gander Outdoors. If you're not familiar with Gander Outdoors, it's a sporting goods store that was previously known as Gander Mountain, before it was bought out by the Camping World family of stores. In fact, shortly after this took place, Camping World decided to dissolve their Gander Outdoors stores and get out of the hunting firearm business. I personally worked at the gun counter. Now on to my unnerving experience. I was working the closing shift, which was 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. So come 4 p.m., it was time for my lunch break. I drove 3 miles down the road to a local ice cream place that also sold bar-quality food. I had to take a right turn off the main road to get there, which was a pretty busy road. Lunch was normal. I got my food, sat down at a picnic table in front of the ice cream shop, and ate my lunch. On my way back, I now had to turn left to get back onto the busy main road. Yet oncoming traffic was making sure I had to wait a bit. In just moments, there was a medium-sized gap between 2 oncoming cars, and to be honest, I could have made it if I sped up. However, being in an accident myself at one point, and having witnessed half a dozen of them, I decided not to chance it. It was then that a white moving van behind me began to lay down its horn, multiple times for 3-second intervals. This seriously struck a nerve. I stuck up my middle finger and hung it out my window. We've all been there, right? I forgot about it pretty quick, finally making a left turn onto the road that would take me back to work. As I pulled into the parking lot, I realized the guy I'd flipped off near the ice cream shop followed me all the way back to my job. I parked, and the white van parked only 2 car spots away from me. I got out of my car, locking the door while staring at the driver. He was an older man in his 60s, with shoulder-length yellowish-white hair and a patchy beard. He made eye contact with me as I made my way past his vehicle and into the store. I immediately went into the employee break room, which was directly to the right upon entering the building. I put my blue work shirt back on and clipped a radio to my waistline. Coming out of the break room, I headed towards the firearms counter, which was in the back of the store. There, I found the elderly man again, talking to my coworker Miles. I could see his full figure now. He was 5'4", skinny, with dirty gray sweatpants and a baggy button-up shirt. He glanced over at me and immediately stormed out of the building. Miles then glared at me, asking, "Did you do something to tick that guy off?" He came in asking for some .38 special ammunition because he was going to teach someone a lesson. Then he was asking if we had any cameras outside. I explained to him what happened, and my coworker's eyes went wide. "Dude, you better go out and check to make sure he isn't screwing your car up," he quickly said. I made my way back up to the front of the store, standing right at the door where I could see the man circling my car with a revolver tucked in his waistband. I was nervous, but I was praying that he wouldn't try anything in broad daylight. I stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and continued to watch him. He must have circled my car about 5 times before he looked up and saw me. Hesitantly, he started to inch forward with his hand on his waist, and I thought I'd really made a mistake. In a split second, I looked up to a security camera that was, in fact, pointed directly at mine and the man's vehicles. When my eyes returned to the man, he was now also looking at the security camera. He gave me one final, hate-filled glare, his face beet red. His hand came off his waist, and he got back into his van, finally driving off. If it weren't for that security camera, that man just might have had the nerve and the courage to do something very bad to me. All over something stupid. Night of the Mannequins, from Umbral Poe. One of the worst fears to experience is one from your childhood, and that is the unfortunate experience I had one night while working at a clothing retail store. Growing up, I've always had a weird fear of mannequins. I don't know if it's the uncanny valley aspect to them, or because they just have an empty void for a face. But I always and still do get a tingly, spine-chilling wave that creeps down my back anytime I see a mannequin. It's quite literally the only time I ever have a reaction to a scary movie, when they include a creepy mannequin. This experience takes place a few years ago. I was hired on as a seasonal employee for the holidays, mostly for the dock/unloading of trucks, but due to a short staff and lots of call-ins, I was often asked to take on and fill in for other departments. This particular day, I wasn't informed that the schedule had been changed, so I came in later than the rest of my team, or rather, co-workers, meaning they got to leave earlier than I did. I wound up having to work the late shift alone, which mostly meant I was sorting the merchandise, tagging them, and pushing them out to the sales floor, or putting them away as well as putting boxes into their hold storage area. Being a clothing retail store, there were mannequins all over the place. I spent most of my shift in the dock, sorting and organizing and tagging the clothes. By the time I pushed some racks out, it was closing time, so that meant restocking the tables and racks in mild darkness, as only a few lights had been kept on. The corner of the store I was working in was unfortunately in the corner where it was dark, leaving me to use a flashlight on my phone to see what I was doing. Getting near the end of the rack I had, the last few items had to go on a table. This table was directly next to a mannequin. I recall feeling a shiver down my spine, and I hesitated due to being in the dark and all alone with it. I tried to get over the fear and hesitancy, and I eventually began to fold and place the clothes on the table. That was until I heard a soft, creaking sound. One I was slightly familiar with, the sound a few of our mannequins would make when you adjusted the positions or posable parts on them. I stopped what I was doing, and I looked around, but I didn't see anything or notice anything changing except the head of the mannequin that was right next to me. I could have swore it was slightly tilted downwards, towards me. Feeling pretty creeped out, I decided to stop worrying about folding the clothes nicely. Instead, I just wanted to finish up the last few. As I put the final shirt down, I heard the creaking again, and just as I had turned to walk away, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I gasped and turned around, but again, there was no one there. However, the right arm of the same mannequin was noticeably moved, now left in a different position that it wasn't in before. Another physical shiver went down my spine. I walked away, going backwards, so I could keep my eyes on it. As my next and last task of the night was to take the few pallets of boxes, scan them, wrap them up, and then bring them to storage, I decided to take the freight elevator, which was tucked away in a back room down a hallway. Unbeknownst to me, someone had stored a few mannequins in that same hallway. But as it was still lit up, more than the previous area, I didn't feel as hesitant or scared to walk down it. I just quickly made my way down the hallway and into the freight elevator. Sure, my nerves were still shot, maybe because I was tired at that point, or maybe because what I saw had terrified me. Probably both. As I pushed the button on the elevator to go down, I turned to look at the mannequins. And I swear, just as the freight elevator doors closed, I saw the mannequins' joints move, subtly twisting, contorting a bit, just enough for me to see it. My heart had stopped in my chest. After I realized the elevator was going down, away from the mannequins, I breathed a sigh of relief. The elevator was moving downwards. Suddenly, a loud metallic bang rang out from the outer door. After hearing and seeing what I'd seen that night, I told myself, screw it, I'm out. The moment the doors opened back up, I speed-walked my way out of the dock and onto the sales floor to the closest register, and I clocked out. I gave my partner a call, telling them I was ready to be picked up. I closed everything down that I was responsible for, grabbed my belongings, and left through the employee entrance/exit, and I waited outside for my ride to arrive. The next time I came back to work, the first thing I did was go to the manager in charge of making the schedule for my team and telling her that I no longer was able to work closing and late shifts. I gave some BS excuse, and I knew if I told her the real reason, I would just get laughed at. I basically had to go with a little white lie. Though I did tell one coworker what happened. We were pretty close and dang near work besties, and I expected her to laugh at me. But she took on a serious expression, telling me that similar things had happened to her there. She swears that she's also seen them move after closing, that it's become something a lot of the employees have experienced. But it's sort of one of those never talk about it kind of things. Warning: the following story contains vivid depictions of dead children. Midnight Shift, from JayJay. When I was younger, I worked in a 24-hour restaurant as a server. Anyone who has worked as a server knows you see some crazy things from time to time, and when you're open all the time, it increases the craziness tenfold. It was a bitterly cold night around midnight. It was slow, but we had a few random tables. I was working the section closest to the front door when I heard screaming coming from outside. I started walking towards the front door. The screaming was getting closer and closer. I could start to make out some words. I heard baby and police. Then I saw a figure running towards me. I opened the inner door as a woman slammed through the outer door, pushing right past me. When she did, a horrible stench assaulted me, and I audibly gagged. She slid to a stop in the lobby, and she began to scream to call the police. I yelled for my coworker behind the counter to call 911. The woman stopped screaming and started to incoherently babble. It was at this time that I really looked at her. She was obviously homeless, with baggy pants smeared with dirt and who knows what else. She had a long coat that went down to her knees, an old hat with one of those pom-poms on top that was bouncing with her erratic movements. Her hair was clumpy and dirty, and you couldn't even tell what color it was. She had multiple scarves on that were covered in mess, and the smell was the worst part. It was so strong, like rotting food. I asked her as calmly as I could what was going on. My coworker was on the phone with 911, and I knew from previous times that they liked to know what they were in for when they arrived on the scene. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, she spun around and looked me right in the eyes, I'll never forget the look on her face. It was indescribable, but if I had to come close, I would say it was a look of intense sadness mixed with rage. She kept eye contact with me, reaching into her pocket, pulling out a crusty steak knife. She slowly started walking towards me with the knife down at her side. I backed out the door, which I was still holding open, and she started to talk. At first, I couldn't understand her. She got louder and louder, and I could hear her saying over and over again, "You could never, you could never." I may be brave, but I'm not that brave. I screamed, and she stopped. She looked down at the floor and started to cry. At some point, she dropped the knife, and I quickly put the glass door between myself and her. I looked past her at the customers and my coworkers, scrambling to the far side of the restaurant towards the emergency exit. I could hear sirens heading our way. I stayed in the vestibule, holding the door closed just in case. When the police arrived, they sent me away from the door. I still had a view of the whole scene from the sidewalk. An officer began to approach her with his hand ready on his gun. She looked at him, tears still running down her cheeks. She brought her hands up and started to unzip her coat. When she opened her coat fully, it took me a few minutes to comprehend what I was looking at. The woman was holding a baby that was not moving. It was a gray, pasty color, covered in dried blood and dirt. It was attached to the woman's bare chest with duct tape. I turned away. I couldn't look at the scene any longer. Sometime during the event, I'd started to cry, and I had only just realized it. Everything after that moment was a blur. My understanding of the situation was that this poor woman had given birth, and the baby was stillborn. In her mind, she was trying to get help. The police had said they think she gave birth 2 days earlier. I still have nightmares about that night. Paranormal Encounters from Frankie G. I'm a 33-year-old man. I'd like to share a series of paranormal experiences I had when I was 16 or 17 that really jump-started my hobby into ghost hunting and paranormal investigation. Since I was a kid, I was always into the paranormal as far as I can remember. I even have faint memories of early paranormal experiences when I was around 10 years old, such as seeing the Hat Man entity. I'd never even heard of the Hat Man phenomena until I was in my late 20s, so it couldn't have been my imagination. I've also heard scratching from beneath my bed, which my mother shrugged off by saying it was the cats. But it couldn't have been the cats because the cats she was talking about were outside. These scratches came directly beneath my bed. But the experiences I want to share now happened in my mid-teens and were truly profound, totally unexplainable, and some were even frightening. When I was about 16 or 17 years old, I lived in a small town called Caledonia in the province of Ontario in Canada. These paranormal experiences happened around 2004. I had a daughter at a very young age, so while I went to school, I also worked on the side in a small restaurant, which mostly sold pizza and breakfast. Business was usually slow. It was located near the famous Caledonia Bridge. I scored the job from my friend Graham, who I went to elementary school with when I was younger. His mother owned the place, in fact. When I began working there, I didn't feel anything bad. I didn't think it was haunted, although I did get an eerie feeling in the basement. Then again, what basement doesn't give off an eerie vibe in an old building? So I didn't think much of it. I worked there for a week or two before I experienced anything strange. I did work alone in the beginning, and as I said earlier, business was usually slow. I spent most of my shifts watching DVD movies alone, or with my coworker, Lindsay, who would start to join me later on during my shifts. I should note here that the basement door had a small padlock on it, which we used to keep strangers out. That day, Lindsay and I were talking a lot, since business was slow. It didn't take long before we both discovered we had similar interest in the paranormal. She told me about her passion in ghost hunting, and how she captured unexplained anomalies taking pictures and videos of alleged haunted locations, one of which was the Blue Ghost Tunnel in St. Catharines, about 30 to 45 minutes away from us in Caledonia. This intrigued me, because I heard about that place on a TV show called Creepy Canada. I asked her to show me these pictures and videos, and one day she did. On another day at work, I saw her mini pics of orbs of different colors, and pics of white mist she claimed wasn't smoke or condensation viewed on her laptop. But what intrigued me the most was the VHS tape she played for me on the TV in the dining area. It showed her and her friends walking down a stony path to the Blue Ghost Tunnel in the middle of the day in the summer. To their surprise, the entire entrance to the tunnel and the tunnel itself was filled with thick white fog or mist, seen kind of twirling. As they entered the tunnel, one could see it was cold in there, because they began to be able to see their breaths as they talked in the middle of a hot summer day. Now, sure, I can't say that part was 100% paranormal, but it was bizarre. This influenced me to go there myself eventually, which I did many times in the day and night, but I never did experience or see the thick fog or mist, which I saw in her video. Not long after her showing me this, and talking long hours about ghosts in the dining room, we began to finally experience things at that restaurant. On to the first experience. Lindsay and I were working together, and I had to take a leak, so I told her I'd be right back. I walked down the hall like I did many times before, and I opened the Mel bathroom door on my left. And as I went to close the door, I noticed the basement door directly in front of me was closed and locked as usual. So I closed the bathroom door and turned to walk to the toilet, maybe 3 or 4 feet away from the door. I start to do my business, and as I do, I suddenly hear the door open behind me. I didn't know what to think. My only assumption was it was Lindsay. I was quickly thinking to myself, why would she come down here if she knew I was peeing? I thought maybe she was playing a joke. So I laughed to myself and finished up my business, planning to go right to the dining room to ask her what that was about. As I began to walk towards the bathroom door, which was now open, I see the basement door again, and it's unlocked and wide open as well. I could see down the stairs into that eerie basement. Immediately, I think to myself, that was locked just a few seconds ago. How in the world did I not hear the padlock unlock and the basement door come open? I brushed this off as Lindsay as well. Maybe I didn't hear it because of the sound of the toilet flushing. I was quickly certain Lindsay was playing a joke on me because of all the intense ghost talks we've been having over the past couple of shifts. I calmly shut the basement door and locked it back up, but honestly, I felt uneasy. I proceeded to walk to the dining area. Lindsay wasn't there. I remember she said she was going to make herself some food earlier, so I went over to the kitchen door on my right. I went in and saw Lindsay cooking herself something. I asked, "Did you open the bathroom door and basement door while I was in the washroom?" She replied, kind of surprised, giggling, "No, why?" I then got the biggest shivers down my neck, fear coming over me. "Don't mess with me, Lindsay," I said. "Somebody just turned the knob on the bathroom door while I was taking a leak and opened it a bit, and when I was finished, the basement door was wide open." From her facial expression, I could see a bit of fear welling up in her too. "No, I swear, I was in the kitchen the whole time. Are you serious?" She asked me to verify that I was not playing a joke on her. I felt like she was being sincere, but I couldn't be sure. Together, we searched the restaurant, but we didn't find anyone else there. Now, as I'm typing this, I remember we never checked the basement. Nothing else happened for the rest of the shift, Both of us were left thinking one of us was messing with the other. For my next shift, I was supposed to work alone. I told my boss about the experience, telling her I think the place was haunted and I refused to work alone. I thought then she would think I was crazy, but to my surprise, she believed me. With a sigh, she said she knew the place was haunted, so she didn't force me to work alone. She stayed with me on my shift and would later set out my shifts to always have someone with me. Most of the time, it was Lindsay who worked with me. As time passed over a course of a few weeks, the basement door started to unlock and open on its own, nearly at least once every shift. And it would seem to almost always happen whenever Lindsay and I were separated, not in the same room. It was creepy at the start, but after becoming accustomed to it, the fear lessened. I even started to suspect that perhaps it was Lindsay continuing to play a long prank on me. That was until one day. It happened when we were in the same room. We both had seen the basement door locked and closed like it should be. We were together doing work in the kitchen. When we finished up there, we went to go watch a movie in the dining area. We exited the kitchen, and to our surprise, the basement door was unlocked and wide open. We looked at each other, fear in our eyes, but a bit of excitement too. For some people, experiencing the paranormal can give you a high, a rush of adrenaline. It makes you question reality, especially after confirming that something that happened was indeed real, with a lack of a good explanation. We both knew that no one else was in that restaurant at the time, and we were both 100% sure the door had been closed and padlocked. Lindsay thought I was messing with her the whole time, and I told her I thought the same about her. We both then knew that this was real. It was happening. Some spirit or entity was toying with us. We shut and relocked the basement door, and we acted like nothing had happened. But this time, whatever was messing with us did something it hadn't done yet before. It opened the door again and again, each and every time we closed it. When we finished our shift and closed down the restaurant, the activity finally stopped. Our next couple of shifts got scarier and more intense. The strange activity started to increase, and it became somewhat aggressive. I don't remember how many shifts this transpired over, but I'll recall them the best I can. One time, the basement door kept opening and we kept shutting it, but it wouldn't stop opening. Sure, it was scary, but it was more annoying. So one shift, I got the courage to open the door, and I stood at the top of the basement stairs, and I called out, Listen, you've made yourself known. We know you're here. Please stop opening this door. It's scaring us and irritating us." After I called out to it, I shut and locked the door once again. But what happened next scared the heck out of me. I was in the dining area looking down the hall at the basement door. I looked away for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and when I looked back, it was open. How did that open without me hearing it? How did it open so fast? Surely I would have heard the padlock and the doorknob turn, but I didn't, even though I was only about 7 feet away from the door. Out of all the experiences I've had there, this was one of the most profound ones. It really drilled into me a passion to want to research the paranormal. Not only had I not heard any noise at all, I don't even think 2 to 3 seconds was enough time to unlock and open the door. The fact that I asked it to stop, and it didn't, frightened Lindsay and I. It was almost like the spirit was saying, "Screw you," through its actions. So Lindsay decided to talk to it at the top of the stairs, then shut and locked the door herself. To our surprise, it stopped for the rest of the shift after she told it to stop. I theorized it was a guy, and it didn't like me, but for some reason it or he liked Lindsay. I don't really know. I was trying to make sense of it all. On another occasion, we were both in the kitchen, and when we both came out, as usual, the basement door was open. This time, though, I felt an angry presence. When I entered the hallway to close the door, I heard noises, and I noticed all 4 doors were open. The male and female bathroom doors, the janitor's closet door, and basement door were open. Upon further investigation, the noises I heard were actually the tap water running in the washrooms and janitor's closet, and all the sinks had their hot water running too, creating condensation in the bathrooms and closet. I had to go through and shut off all the valves, closing each and every door. I was terrified. What happened next was very bizarre. Lindsay and I walked into the kitchen, and the big jug of olive oil was moved into the middle of the kitchen within seconds of exiting and re-entering the place. Again, without any sound. Now that I'm older and I do not get as spooked as easily, or I should say I still get spooked, but I have a lot more courage, I'd like to think. Usually I run towards the activity and not away from it, hoping to catch my experiences on camera so I can share them with the world. But let me tell you, 17-year-old me was not having it. I quit working there because the activity was getting too intense. Too bad I didn't set up some IR cams in there overnight at the time. A couple of weeks after I quit, I later heard from my boss or former boss that it escalated to it ripping the cupboard door off. I didn't talk to Lindsay for many years. I'm talking well over 10 years, and my experiences became distant memories. I often wondered if what I experienced was even real or not. One year, actually not too long ago, Lindsay found me on Facebook, and she confirmed all my distant memories were true. She remembered everything exactly as I did. That restaurant eventually went out of business, and the building was vacant for years. Today, the building is owned by a company called Seguin Engineering. I emailed them explaining who I was and that in the past I've experienced paranormal activity there, and I asked if the staff had experienced anything themselves. If so, I would love to do a professional scientific paranormal investigation there. They replied, saying that no paranormal activity had happened, and I was not allowed to investigate. The Nurse, from Abs of Steel. I'm a disabled 40-year-old female. I'm a partially paralyzed paraplegic. I can use my right hand and arm, but my left hand is contracted shut. 4 or 5 years ago, I'm not sure which, I had a terrifying situation happen at the nursing home I live at. My hospital bed was facing the double closet by the window. Above my head is a pull-overhead light that lights up about half the bed. I'd fallen asleep one night with the light on, like I usually do. I had the most vivid dream. I could hear music playing like a rave, very loud, like techno or something. In the dream, I was still in my hospital bed at the nursing home. The door to my closet slowly began to open. At first, I didn't see anything but my clothes hanging in there. I remember calling out, "Is anyone there?" All I could hear was the music. About 7 feet off the ground in the closet, I suddenly see a head peer out. It had very dark brown hair that was just past her shoulders but feathered back, thick dark brown eyebrows, and bright gray eyes. I couldn't see the rest of the person's face because they had on a surgical mask. This person kicked out one very long leg with red fishnet stockings and stiletto high heels. The person kept kicking each leg out can-can style. The music was still playing and the rest of the person's body came out dancing from the closet. In the dream, I sat up in the bed watching the person. They continued to dance, but she was now wearing a nurse's uniform, a navy blue top and bottoms, but she still had on the red stiletto heels. She danced towards me, reaching into her pockets. She pulled out a clear plastic pill cup full of what looked to be Flintstone's vitamins. The nurse brought the cup to my lips and forced my mouth open, dumping the pills into my mouth, making me chew them. After she was sure I'd swallowed, she began to dance again, and, without bending, she dropped to the floor and slid under my bed like a freaking snake. Then her hands shot out, held me down. I woke up then, crying, and I couldn't move or make noise. I couldn't even breathe. I was panicking because I could not call for help, and I was silently screaming in my mind. Thankfully, a CNA came in, carrying a tray for breakfast. She put it on my bedside table and said, "Good morning, sunshine." When she saw the tears running down my cheeks, and me not moving or breathing, she began to rub my sternum to try to get me to snap out of it. She pulled out her walkie-talkie and yelled, "911, room 105B, all nursing staff now." A minute later, a nurse and CNA came running in, followed by 2 nurses and the rest of the staff. I could see what was going on, but I was in and out of it. I still wasn't breathing. My mouth and nose were turning blue. 2 nurses began to do chest compressions and CPR on me. I felt my lungs expand, and I blew a breath out, starting to cough. The staff grabbed my shoulders and sat me up. I started to breathe on my own again. They checked my vitals. My oxygen was 81. They turned on my oxygen and gave me a breathing treatment. My blood pressure and heart rate were through the roof. They gave me hydroxyzine for my anxiety to help me calm down. I finally began to relax and told them what happened. The nurses and my NP talked for a while, telling me that she thinks I had sleep paralysis brought on by the scary dream, triggering an anxiety attack that caused an asthma attack. They moved my bed to the other side of the room by the door, and thankfully I never had that dream again. It was so real and terrifying. The thought of it makes my heart beat like crazy, and I get so scared. I don't know who she really was, but I pray I never meet her again, because next time, she may be the end of me. Something in the hayfield. From The Washington Farmer. I don't usually think much of the supernatural, but this experience really changed my perspective. I'm 22, but I was 21 at the time this happened. I spent the summer of 2022 working in southwestern Oregon. I'd taken a summer job off from Wildland Fire for a good-paying job baling hay for a custom hay company. It was mid-August, and they had me in a New Holland T7 260 with 2 other tractors in the field that night. We did most of our meadow hay baling at night, as you have to be careful about the moisture of grass hay when baling, or else it can spontaneously combust when stacked. I was working on the west end of the field, while the other 2 tractors were on the east end, making their way towards me. It must have been around midnight or 1 a.m. I was going along, jamming out to some Creedence Clearwater Revival, when my baler got plugged. The hay had bunched up in front of the feeder drum. I was probably going too fast for the conditions, or I ran across a wet spot. The field was flood irrigated, so it wasn't too uncommon to find some hay that hadn't dried completely. I climbed out of my tractor to deal with the plug, pulling out handfuls of hay until the baler would take the pile. The tractor had a bunch of auxiliary lights, so the area around it was quite well lit. To be honest with you, I never did like the dark, but I felt pretty safe at the time. I was probably 2 windrows from the edge of the field at that moment. The fence lines around the field had tall canary grass growing at least 6 feet tall, where the swathers couldn't get to. This had always bothered me for some reason, but I'm from eastern Washington, so I'm used to being able to see for a ways out. As I lay in the hay trying to unplug my baler, I heard the grass at the edge of the field moving. I looked over towards the sound, but I didn't see anything just yet. I figured it was an animal or something, and I didn't think much more of it. After I got the baler unplugged, I hopped back into the tractor and kept going. It wasn't too long after that I happened to see a coyote at the edge of where my lights were shining. Again, didn't think much of it. Fast forward about 20 minutes, I see a coyote again, still hanging out just outside the range of the work lights of my tractor. I started to think about it, how bold it was, getting this close to my tractor. Around 3 a.m., I had a shear bolt break on the baler. It's a simple fix. It's just a bolt that goes through the flywheel of the baler that's designed to break if there's too much strain on it. Kind of a safety feature to make sure you don't damage the baler itself. I went out to change out the bolt when I heard something. It sounded like a voice, but I couldn't quite make it out. I tried to hurry up with the shear bolt replacement. As I finished up and I was closing the shield on the baler, I heard the voice again. It kind of sounded like one of my friends who was driving one of the tractors on the other side of the field. I looked around, but both sets of headlights were still moving. I was starting to freak out at this point. There shouldn't be anyone out here at 3 a.m. We're 5 miles down a gravel road from a town of like 40 people. I started to rush towards the tractor and climb the steps. The voice was getting louder, calling my name. I climbed in and slammed the door shut behind me. As I'm putting the tractor in gear, I looked out the door. At the edge of where my lights were shining was what looked to be a coyote. This time, however, there's something wrong with it. It looked all mangy and the eyes weren't shining the right color. They almost looked crimson red. On its face was what resembled a smile. Then I swear I saw it stand up on its hind legs. It tried to take a clumsy step in my direction. When I saw this, I dumped the clutch and kept on moving. Up until the sun came up, every time I looked in the mirror, I could see a coyote staying just beyond the lights of my tractor, just like it had before. As the sun was coming up over the mountain next to us, I saw that coyote begin to run towards the tall grass at the end of the field. I radioed the other guys in the other tractors, but they had no clue what I was talking about. Thank God I didn't have a plug up or another shear bolt break after that. I have no idea what I saw or what I heard that night, but that wasn't the last of it. Several nights later, we'd gotten rained out, so I was able to sleep at night instead of during the day. It was in the bunkhouse. I was on the second floor on my bunk bed. I just woke up around 4 a.m. and I could not go back to sleep. But when I'm up, I'm up. So I just lay in my bed, scrolling through TikTok. It was around then that I began to hear scratching on the window. Like I said, this is the second floor. Now, there are no trees near the building. It was then that I heard that same dang voice trying to mimic one of my coworkers who wasn't even in town that night. After about 20 minutes, everything went silent again. That was the last I ever heard of whatever that was, and I hope I never have to deal with it again. I've no clue what it was, but I have heard stories of things like skinwalkers, and I wonder if it could have been that. The Thing in the Dark. From Anonymous. I work as a DSP, Direct Support Professional, and as a DSP, I go into the homes of people who have disabilities, those who really can't take care of themselves and need help getting through their days. But I work the night shift, and of course, by company rules, I can't give the client's name or what city we live in. I'll just refer to the client as client. This was the first time being on the overnight shift at that client's house. Before I get into what happened, I have to explain the layout a little bit. When you walk in, to your left is the living room, connecting to the dining room, and just before that, on the right is a hallway that goes straight down to the client's room. That night, I'd help the client to bed around 10:30 to 11 p.m. I have to check the client every hour to make sure they're all good. It was about 10 minutes past 2 a.m., and I was sitting alone in the dining room on my computer, ready to go check on the client soon. The hallway at the moment was basically a black void, so I always used a flashlight on my phone to go down the hallway. When the time came, I went down the hall to check on the client in his room. After checking in on him, I began to go back into the hallway. For whatever reason, as I walked back down the hallway, I didn't use the flashlight on my phone. It was then that I heard the floor creaking behind me. I turned around, and I saw a tall figure near the client's room. Keep in mind, the hallway is nearly pitch black without a light, and I'd seen this figure that was darker than the hallway around it. Before I could turn the hallway light on, I saw the figure go back into the client's room. There was no other movement besides it slightly leaning back. I turned the hallway light on, and I ran to the client's room quickly. When I got there was nothing there, just the client, sleeping fine. I turned around and went back to the dining room to get my documentation on the sleep check for the client. For the rest of the night, I just kept checking around and looking around the corners to make sure nothing was there. Thankfully, nothing else terrifying happened that night. When I got off my shift, I called my supervisor and told her that I'm not working in that house again. It's been about a week and a half since that happened, and I keep wondering what I saw. Man in the Corner, from Morgan H. I wanted to share my mother's story. For context, she's been a nurse for over 28 years and has worked in a variety of hospital and clinical settings across Kentucky. The following story will be told in her perspective. I was working the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift in the ICU. That day, I was assigned to a peculiar patient. Every time I would go into the patient's room, she would look toward the corner of the room with a horrified look on her face, and she would beg me not to leave her alone. She began to complain of a dark man standing in that corner. I spent most of the day in her room trying to comfort her. I tried moving the curtains to show her that there wasn't anyone there. I opened up the blinds so she could see the sunshine coming through the window. When these things didn't work, I decided to spend every free moment I had in her room. At the end of my shift, I gave a report to the oncoming nurse to make sure to discuss the patient's fear. The following morning, I was assigned to the same patient. Within minutes of getting my report, the patient was in cardiac arrest. We rushed into her room, began CPR, and got her back. She took a huge, gasping breath, opened her eyes wide, and sat up as far as she could go. She then turned and looked right at me, and she said to me, "I told you not to leave me alone. He almost got me." Warning: the following story contains vivid descriptions of dead animals. The Thing That Watches, from Paxel 3Z601. My mother owned a horse farm in Maryland, which we helped work on. We lived in a fairly residential area, but it was still quite desolate. It's easier to understand this story with a bit of a layout. Our driveway is around a mile long, with a dog kennel being the first building you see on your right. If you go a bit farther, the barn and house are fairly close together, with a paddock in between the barn and woods. So, around 2 years ago, my mother had me dump a wheelbarrow on our manure pile out in the woods. This was during the winter, so it got dark pretty fast. The sun was almost down, and the woods were very thick and dark, even during the day. As I dumped the wheelbarrow, I looked up, and I could only describe what I saw as resembling Slender Man, mixed with something else. It had an almost glowing white face with reddish-brown eyes. It was lanky, arms reaching to the ground. I made eye contact with it, and it stared back at me. Then it reached out and tried to grab me. Luckily, I was in track and field at the time. I ran as fast as I could, even with the extra weight. I ran with that wheelbarrow, hearing it almost laughing at my fear. I ran into the house and told my mother. I remember her just playing it off as our neighbor getting home from hunting. But there's no way that's what it was. Around a week later, I had to take the trash up to the barn where the barrel was. As I was walking past the pasture, I saw a dead fox in our paddock. Poor thing had been shredded all up, and the head was separated from the body. This was also around the same time of night as the first encounter. When I walked back from putting the trash in the barrel, I saw it. That thing again, except now it was holding the head in its hand. It was stretching its arm out over the fence, over the driveway. I looked over and it smiled. Then I swear it laughed. I ran, and I doubt I touched the ground as I ran. I was going so fast. I slammed open the door, running around the house, locking every door and window. Our dogs were freaking out. My mom then came out of her room, almost crying, as something slammed against the windows and doors of the house. We called our neighbors from my bathroom, which was the only room in the house without a window. We heard a car horn and a car flying down our driveway. Then everything went silent. Since this event, I haven't seen it since. But after that, every year on that day, the entire neighborhood would hear a cry for help from an eerie voice. I don't know if it's a demon or a ghost. I don't even know if I want to know. Update. I saw it again. It seems it has a friend. It was on a night I was working on some college work at my desk. My desk has a window right over it, looking right out into the woods. I had the blinds open and I looked up out the window at some point. There it was. But next to it stood a canine-looking animal with a human body and head. Update Part 2. I'm not the only one who's seen it, apparently. I have 8 friends who live within a few miles from my house. 2 of them are sisters that live next to me. One night, they let their dogs out, but the 2 dogs for some reason immediately ran back. They were even whining and had their tails between their legs. When the sisters looked out, trying to see what was wrong, they both saw the same creature I saw hanging from the side of a tree. They ran back inside, but as they did, they swear they heard it laugh. Another friend of mine had a similar encounter, but it was on his roof, staring down at him while he smoked a cigarette. A few of my other friends just saw it in their driveways. What do you think it is? It's behind you. From Anonymous. I'd probably be in some heat for this if we ever actually reported it. I know we would have been told to keep it to ourselves. It was 2014 in the Middle East. We were in an area I'm not allowed to disclose. We were clearing a small village that we were told was abandoned. My squad was tasked with checking out what we assumed to be an empty house. Upon approaching the house, we saw someone run by an upstairs window. Immediately, we changed our tactics, breaching the front door. While sweeping the first floor, we could hear running upstairs, followed by the sound of a door slamming. We stacked up at the bottom of the stairs, and we began to ascend. The stairs led to a T-shaped intersection in the hallway. 1 and 2 went left. I took right and covered the only closed door we could see. 1 and 2 cleared the room on the left and stacked on me after. As I led the way to the closed door, it slowly opened. But we were at the ready. When the door was fully opened, there was nothing. After a few verbal commands and warnings to come out, there was no response. We began to slowly approach the open door. Just as I was about to cross the threshold of the door, it slammed right in my face. A little shocked and angry, someone just hit me with the door. I kicked it open, and we made our entry. It was a small room with a small open closet. There was no one in there. We dropped our guard and looked at one another. Not a word was said, but we were all thinking the same thing. I turned to look out the window, watching the mounted lights clear buildings and homes throughout the town for a moment. We got the call soon to rally back up, and I turned to exit. There, peeking over Two's shoulder, was a black mass. All I could see was a huge grinning smile on a face which remained completely black, even with a flashlight pointing right at it. One and I immediately drew, and Two unknowingly panicked, diving forwards towards us. The split second my eyes tracked Two to the ground, the figure had disappeared. Holding cover on the door, I helped Two up, and I explained what happened. We knew what we saw wasn't human, and we had to leave. It couldn't have been more than 50 feet to the front door, but let me tell you, it felt like a mile. There was a picture frame adjacent to our door, 15 feet in front of us, roughly 5 feet before the stairs. The moment we rounded that corner to the hallway, we saw the thing again behind us in the reflection. Naturally, we reacted, but when we did, nothing was there. So we just ran. I don't think I touched a single stair running down them so quickly, and out the front door we went. We all sat there for a while just looking at the front door of that house, making sure whatever that was hadn't followed us out. One pointed his mounted light towards an upstairs window, and we saw it again, just sitting there grinning ear to ear. Teeth so white, the light reflected off of them, and a head darker than night. We sat there frozen, just watching the thing for a solid 5 minutes. Almost in a trance, I would say. Coincidentally, we all had this overwhelming urge to go back inside the house. Our sergeant radioed us, and this broke our trance. Just like that, the black thing crept into the shadows and out of sight. We never told anyone directly, but later, during our time there, a national working at base overheard us talking about the town, warning us of a djinn haunting the elders' home, which had driven them all out of the town. That face still haunts me to this day. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com.